The courtroom in Chicago felt colder than the January air outside. Maybe it was the marble floors. Maybe it was the judge's silence. Or maybe it was the sight of my own family standing on the opposite side, united against me. My sister stood at the front, chin high, fingers clasped with a confidence she had never earned. Her voice sliced through the quiet as she delivered her practiced line. Pay up or step aside. She didn't tremble, but I didn't either. Behind her, my parents nodded like a jury of two who had already reached their verdict before anyone spoke. My father's hand rested on her shoulder. My mother's lips tightened with approval. Their eyes drilled into me, waiting for the apology they believed I owed them. Instead, I straightened my coat and lifted my chin. They truly had no idea what was coming. My name is Lena Hart. I'm 32, and contrary to the version of me my family prefers, I am not fragile. I built a quiet, ordered life in Denver, working as a project planner whose world revolved around structure, schedules, and early morning rituals. Stability was my habit, not my weakness. But families rewrite your identity until you barely recognize yourself. Growing up, my younger sister Serena was the sun around which our household revolved. If she lost something, Mom replaced it. If she cried, Dad blamed the nearest object. If I corrected her, I was scolded for being too harsh. I can't any W's. Serena created the storm. I dried the floors afterward. That pattern never changed. When she married Ryan 2 years ago, my parents nearly went bankrupt trying to impress the world. They paid for extravagant things, venues, designers, spa weekends, just to maintain the illusion of a perfect daughter living a perfect life. But when Serena overspent everything and secretly racked up debt under Ryan's name, somehow responsibility boomeranged back to me. You make more money, my mother said. Family helps family, my father insisted. You're stable, Serena added, as if stability meant servitude. When I finally said no, they retaliated by dragging me into court, claiming I should cover the marital debt since Serena had been under pressure. And now, here she stood, repeating her ultimatum. Pay up or step aside. The message was clear. Fix her disaster or be exiled. The judge turned to me. Miss Hart, do you wish to respond? I stepped forward, opened the organized file I had prepared, and handed the bailiff a stack of documents I'd collected over months. I do, Your Honor. Inside were bank statements, forged signatures, hidden credit accounts, and screenshots of transactions. Serena tried to funnel through Ryan's business without his knowledge. Every lie she told had paper trails. Every accusation she made had evidence disproving it. For the first time, the silence in the room didn't fall on me, but on them. My sister's face drained of color. My parents froze, stiffening as though bracing for impact. The judge's expression sharpened with interest. I spoke calmly, letting every word land with the weight of years spent swallowing my voice. I am not responsible for debts created through deception. I will not pay for choices I did not make, and I am done being blamed simply because I know how to stand on my own feet. Serena blinked hard, her false confidence cracking. Mom whispered her name as if that could undo everything. Dad glared at me, searching for a familiar target, realizing the old version of me, the quiet fixer, the family buffer, was gone. The judge cleared his throat. Based on the evidence provided, Miss Hart cannot be held liable. This case is dismissed. Serena gasped. My parents looked like they had been slapped by reality itself. I didn't wait for their excuses. I walked out of the courtroom, the winter air hitting my face like a promise. My boots crunched over the snow, each step lighter than the last. For the first time in my life, I didn't step aside to make room for others. I stepped forward, into a life where their expectations no longer defined me. I sat at my parents' dining table, my fork paused mid-air, realizing the story of my life was shifting again, and once more, I hadn't been invited into the author's room. When Serena announced her pregnancy, she burst into tears, dramatic and trembling, and of course she cried. That was her currency. Mom rushed to her side so quickly it looked practiced, like muscle memory from years of rescuing her. Dad murmured something about our sweet girl, while Ryan stood behind her with a hand placed gently on her shoulder, performing devotion like a man auditioning. No one looked at me. not once. And in that suspended moment, I understood something I never had the courage to admit out loud. The betrayal didn't begin when she slept with my partner or when my parents dragged me into court. It had roots older than any affair, woven into every moment my family chose convenience over truth. I wasn't angry yet. Anger requires energy. I was simply waking up. The weeks after Serena's announcement felt like walking through a house where every picture frame had been tilted overnight. Nothing looked wrong at first glance, but every detail whispered a lie. Mom called me every other day, not to check on me, but to deliver updates on Serena's fragile emotional state, as if my purpose was to monitor her feelings, the way one checks a weather app. Dad suggested I ease up on work stress, as though the knots in my shoulders came from spreadsheets instead of betrayal. And Ryan, the man who helped engineer this disaster, played his role with elegant restraint. He never accused me of being unstable. He didn't have to. He implied it in that soft, deliberate tone people use when they're planting seeds. "She's been overwhelmed lately," he told my parents over dinner, making sure I was within earshot. "It's been a tough season," he added with a sigh heavy enough to earn sympathy from people eager to hand it over. Serena sat beside him, nodding gently, eyes lowered in practiced concern. Just low enough to appear humble, not low enough to hide the satisfaction pulling at the corners of her mouth. She had perfected that performance years ago. Then the story started. "I saw Lena snap at a barista," Serena told Mom. "She forgot an appointment," she claimed. "She broke down crying at work," she whispered. None of it was true. But truth didn't matter. Not when my family already had a narrative they preferred, one where Serena was delicate and I was unraveling. One night, Mom called me with trembling urgency. "We're worried about you, sweetheart. Ryan says he's doing his best, but you need support." Support. The irony almost made me laugh. It was the first moment I realized my role in the family script had officially been rewritten. I was no longer the steady one, the planner, the reliable daughter. I was now the problem to be managed. But the real fracture came in the form of a plain white envelope shoved under my apartment door. I thought it was a delivery mistake until I recognized the seal. A notice to appear in court. Not for the previous case. This was new. A child support hearing. I read the letter twice. Then a third time. The wording was painfully clear. Serena and Ryan were petitioning for financial support, claiming I was the most stable member of the family and therefore financially responsible for the well-being of their unborn child. The child they conceived while betraying me. I stared at the paper until the letters blurred. I had been expecting cruelty, manipulation, emotional warfare, but not this. Not a legal attempt to turn me into their permanent safety net. Still, some foolish part of me hoped my parents would react with disbelief, maybe even outrage. I drove to their house that evening, letter in hand, the cold Denver wind cutting across my face as though trying to warn me. I stepped inside, holding out the envelope. "Please," I said quietly, "tell me you didn't know about this." They looked at each other, and I already knew the answer. I had expected outrage, maybe even a flicker of loyalty. Instead, my parents stood shoulder to shoulder in the living room, their expressions set and strangely resolved, as if they had practiced this moment long before I arrived. "Lena," my father said, voice low but immovable, "you're financially secure. You can help." End quote. My mother folded her arms, the judgment already loaded behind her eyes. "It's not the baby's fault. Don't punish an innocent child." The room tilted for a second. I asked calmly, because anger hadn't reached me yet, if they understood what they were supporting. What Serena and Ryan had done. What lines had been crossed. What loyalty had been sold off like cheap furniture. Before either of them answered, Serena stepped forward. One hand rested over her stomach, the other reached back for Ryan's fingers as though she required an audience for her fragility. "We're building a family," she whispered, almost reverent. "You can either help or step aside." There it was. The first version of the line she would later repeat in court. A threat disguised as logic. A command wrapped in honey. And in that exact moment, something inside me snapped clean, not loudly, not violently, but with precise clarity. Anger didn't come crashing in like a wave. Instead, it rose slowly, like water finding its level. Controlled. Intentional. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I nodded once, slowly, feeling everything in me rearrange into something sharper. The story they thought they were writing, where I played the steady, silent foundation for everyone else's chaos, was almost complete. But they had no idea I was about to take the pen back. The night my parents chose their side, I returned to my apartment, a place that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Nothing had changed physically, same eucalyptus candle on the counter, same stack of reports on my desk, but the air felt thinner, quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I set my keys down and lowered myself to the floor, knees pulled tightly to my chest. I stayed there in the quiet, the street lamp outside casting patterned light across the room. The silence pressed against me, cold, steady, honest. It wasn't grief. Not yet. It was understanding. They weren't confused. They weren't misled. They weren't victims of Serena's theatrics. They chose the easier narrative, the one where Serena was soft and helpless, and I was rigid enough to absorb everyone's mistakes. I had played that role for years. I had worn it like a uniform. But sitting there on the hardwood floor, my breathing finally steadying, I felt the first shift beneath the collapse, a blade emerging from velvet. When I finally stood, it wasn't to cry, it was to work. I pulled out my planner, my phone, my laptop. All the tools I used to build order in the rest of my life now turned toward dismantling the chaos they had created. I began sifting through everything. Messages, timestamps, travel receipts, cloud backups, call logs, photos. I combed through months of conversations, not searching for heartbreak but for patterns. And the patterns were there. Blunt, sloppy, arrogant. Messages from Ryan to Serena. At hours he claimed he had been working late. Serena telling Mom she had dropped off dinner for me the same night my flight itinerary showed I was in Chicago for a project meeting. My parents praising Ryan's sacrifices for the family. While in another thread, Serena bragged to a friend about how she was finally getting the life she deserved. The puzzle pieces weren't scattered, they had been sitting in plain sight, assuming I'd never bother assembling them. But they underestimated me. They always had. Everything they'd built, the lies, the manipulation, the narrative crafted to make me the villain, was about to collapse under the weight of their own negligence. And as I organized the evidence into neat, perfect rows on my screen, one thought pulsed steady and sure. This time they wouldn't see the ending coming. Stay with me, because what comes next will change everything. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the moment they finally realize who they're up against. The narrative wasn't just flawed, it was engineered. Around midnight, just as I was rereading a string of messages, a gentle knock sounded from the apartment next door. When I opened it, Mrs. Turner, my 76-year-old neighbor, stood there, in her slippers, holding a small glass dish covered with foil. "I made too much soup," she said, the same line she always used when she sensed something in me was cracking. We chatted about the weather, construction updates on the street, the new bus route, nothing heavy. Then she hesitated, her eyes softening with something like apology. "I saw Ryan at your sister's place a lot this past spring," she murmured. Before all this mess. I assumed you knew." Her words weren't sharp, but they pierced anyway. Even the outside world had recognized the truth long before my own family had the courage or willingness to admit it. I thanked her, closed the door gently, and returned to the kitchen table where evidence was scattered like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. By 2 a.m, the beginnings of a blueprint sprawled across the wood surface, a timeline. A chain of contradictions, a sequence of messages, missed calls, and overlapping alibis that meant little in isolation but, together, painted the clearest picture I'd ever seen. Serena and Ryan weren't simply reckless. They were strategic. And for the first time, I realized I could be strategic too. When dawn broke, pale light spilling across my notes, I gathered everything into a single folder. Dates, screenshots, observations, receipts, each page a brick in the foundation of a story they never expected me to tell. Later in court, they would see that folder and believe it symbolized hesitation. But in the moment I closed it, my fingers brushing the edge of the paper as calm settled into my bones, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. I looked at the folder and exhaled slowly. Then I smiled. Because the story finally belonged to me. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, the kind of place designed to intimidate by reminding you how many lives had been rewritten within its walls. I walked inside with only the folder tucked beneath my arm, the folder that had taken weeks of sleepless nights to assemble. My heels echoed against the marble, like a metronome marking the countdown to an ending I was finally prepared for. Serena and Ryan were already seated at the petitioner's table. She held his hand, her thumb brushing over his knuckles in small, victorious strokes. When she lifted her gaze and saw me, her smile tightened, not nervous, not remorseful, just smug. The kind of smile worn by someone who believes the finish line is already behind them. My parents sat directly behind them, leaning forward as if their posture alone could prop up the narrative they had chosen. Mom gave me a curt nod. Dad didn't look at me at all. The judge entered, and the room fell into a hush. We rose, we sat, and the hearing began. Serena's attorney spoke first. She had a voice like polished marble, smooth, cold, and unwavering. "Your Honor," she began, "this case is straightforward. The unborn child has been placed in an emotionally and financially complex family situation. As the most stable member of the extended family, Miss Hart is in a unique position to provide ongoing support. Her gaze slid toward me, professional yet rehearsed. It is our position that Miss Hart's financial involvement is not only appropriate but essential for the child's well-being." Serena lowered her eyes, feigning quiet suffering. Ryan sat beside her, jaw set in, practiced disappointment. My parents nodded along, already convinced, already complicit. They believed the script was locked. They believed I would break the way I always had. They believed I was walking into this room unprepared. But they hadn't seen the folder in my hands. And they had no idea. None at all. That today, the story they engineered was about to implode. Miss Hart is the only family member with stable income and long-term financial consistency, Serena's attorney continued. She has historically been part of the support system, and we request formal contribution to ensure the child's well-being. However, my breath didn't waver, but my fingers tightened slightly on the folder, resting in my lap. Serena didn't look at the judge while her lawyer spoke. She looked directly at me, as if she expected me to crumble on cue. As if my collapse was the next line in her script. Ryan cleared his throat dramatically, leaning forward with manufactured sincerity. "Lena knows we're just trying to do what's best," he said. "She knows. She's always been the responsible one. Responsible, not betrayed, not wronged, not used, manipulated, or lied to. Just responsible. It would have been funny if the stakes weren't so high." Then Serena rose to her feet. She intertwined her fingers with Ryan's, faced the judge with a trembling lower lip that quivered right on schedule. "We're not asking for much," she whispered. "Just some help. My sister understands family responsibility. Or at least, she used to." Behind her, my mother murmured approvingly. "That's right." The judge turned to me. "Miss Hart, do you have a response?" This right here was the moment Serena had been waiting for. The moment she assumed I would break, fold, or apologize for things I never did. She expected the quiet sister. The agreeable one. The girl who swept up broken glass while she got comforted. Instead, I reached for my folder and stood. Before opening it, I looked directly at Serena and smiled. Her expression faltered barely, but enough. Then, I flipped the folder open. "Yes, Your Honor," I said calmly. "I do have a response, and I'd like to begin by clarifying a few details." I laid the first page on the table. A printed text thread. Time-stamped. Undeniable. "This," I said, tapping the page, "is Ryan messaging Serena during hours he claimed to be at work." The judge leaned forward, adjusting their glasses. "There are dozens of messages," I continued, "over several months, all in direct contradiction to statements made to this court. 18 day. About said." Serena's face drained of color, her grip tightening around Ryan's hand. I placed the next sheet down. "And these," I said, "are screenshots of Serena telling my mother I had an emotional breakdown at work on a day I was in Seattle for a conference." I slid forward my itinerary, complete with boarding passes and session timestamps. "Here," I pointed, "is the documentation verifying my location." My parents looked at each other. Confusion flickered. Doubt cracked through their certainty. A fracture. A beginning. That's taken out of context, Serena whispered harshly. I didn't look at her. I turned to the judge. There is more, I said, lifting another page. These logs show Serena claiming financial hardship while simultaneously booking luxury spa appointments and weekend trips using funds from Ryan's business accounts. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. And finally, I added, placing the thickest document stack on the table, these are the inconsistencies in their statements to both my family and this court. I tapped each section. Contradicting timelines, fabricated conversations, false reports about my behavior. Every accusation made toward me aligns with dates and times when I was verifiably elsewhere. Serena's eyes widened, not in guilt, but in fear. Fear of losing control of the story. Fear of being seen. Fear of me. This case, I concluded, is not about a child's well-being. It's about attempting to shift financial responsibility for choices I did not make and was actively deceived about. Silence filled the room. Not a soft silence. A heavy one. A silence that recognized truth when it finally entered the space. The judge stared at the documents for a long moment. Behind Serena, my mother's hands clasped tightly together. My father leaned back as if trying to distance himself from the mess he helped create. Serena swallowed hard, voice cracking the first time all morning. Those messages, those aren't. Lena, you're twisting. No, I said quietly, meeting her eyes. You did that all on your own. I didn't look at Serena. I wasn't finished. This, I said, sliding another page forward, is a signed statement from Mrs. Turner, my neighbor, the woman who lives across from my unit in Denver, confirming she saw Ryan visiting Serena regularly long before my relationship ended. She assumed I knew. I didn't. A shift moved through the courtroom like a breeze through tall grass. Quiet. Subtle. But unmistakable. And here, I continued, placing another sheet on the table, is a message from Ryan to Serena after one of those visits. It reads, I paused to let the judge see the printed text. It's better if Lena thinks we're helping her. A gasp rose from somewhere behind us. Ryan jerked upright, red blotches forming across his neck. That's private. The judge lifted a hand. Sit. You will not interrupt again. Ryan sank back into his seat, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles twitch. I opened my notes again, flipping pages with slow, deliberate movements. Until I started documenting everything, I said, my voice steady. Everyone here assumed their version of the story was the only one that existed. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I laid down a page showing dates when Serena told my mother I was unstable, claiming I couldn't handle work pressure. Next to it, I placed footage stills of me giving a department presentation in Chicago that same afternoon, composed, focused, steady. Nothing like the caricature they'd painted. I set down another sheet documenting every time Ryan told my parents I'd been snapping at people or withdrawing emotionally, comparing it with messages between him and Serena. Messages where he wrote things like, "It's working. They think she's losing it. Keep saying she's overwhelmed." Serena's eyes filled with tears, not the soft, performative tears she used to get comfort, but something raw. Panic. Real, unfiltered panic. Ryan's entire face blazed red. "Lena, stop," he snapped. This is exactly what it is," I replied, lifting my final page. Not dramatic. Not explosive. A timeline, color-coded, organized, unmistakable. This, I said, placing it gently before the judge, is the communication audit summarizing months of coordinated manipulation leading up to today's hearing. It includes intentional misrepresentation, narrative staging, and repeated attempts to weaponize family pressure to force me into financial responsibility for their choices. And Bradjis, silence fell. The kind that settles like dust on every surface. Heavy, undeniable. The judge leaned back slowly. Your petition for support, they said, turning to Serena and Ryan, is denied. My mother gasped. My father muttered something I couldn't hear. But the judge wasn't finished. Additionally, they continued, this court is deeply concerned by the pattern of deception, false statements, and misrepresentation presented here today. You may be subject to further review for misuse of legal procedure. Serena clutching Ryan's arm. Ryan staring at the floor. Both of them suddenly very small. And then it happened. The collapse. The unraveling. The panic that had been building behind their ribs ruptured in front of everyone. Their faces drained. Their voices cracked. The story they engineered finally devoured them. It wasn't dramatic like a movie. It wasn't screaming or throwing chairs. It was much quieter. The sound of two people realizing the truth they buried had grown claws, and today, it came crawling back for them. I closed my folder as calmly as someone closing the final chapter of a book they've read too many times. The bailiff called for order. But there was no returning to order. Not for them. Not anymore. I stood, smoothing the front of my blazer. My movements were slow, intentional, entirely mine. I didn't look at Serena. I didn't look at Ryan. I didn't look at my parents. I didn't need to. The story had already shifted, irrevocably, undeniably, in a direction they could no longer control. I walked out of the courtroom, each step steady on the polished floor. Outside, the air felt different, cooler, clearer, like Chicago itself exhaled with me. I didn't rush. I didn't glance behind me. I didn't wonder whether someone would call my name. The world was finally quiet. Behind me, muffled through courthouse doors, fragments of chaos echoed. My mother demanding explanations. My father raising his voice for the first time that day. Serena sobbing. Ryan insisting. This wasn't supposed to go this way. But none of that belonged to me anymore. I reached the steps and paused, feeling the crisp spring wind brush against my face. My entire body felt different, like the weight of years had loosened its grip. Not triumph, not revenge, just release. A clean separation between the woman who walked into court and the one who walked out. For the first time in years, my mind felt quiet. My breath felt like my own. My future felt untouched by their expectations. My phone buzzed. A single message from my mother. We didn't know. I stared at the notification until the screen dimmed. Then I slipped the phone back into my bag. Some truths don't need an audience. Some betrayals don't require a response. And some chapters end without ceremony. At the corner of the courthouse street, I waited for the light to change, watching leaves skate along the pavement in the wind. I wasn't walking away from them. I was walking back to myself, a place I hadn't lived in for a long time. In the end, it wasn't about proving them wrong. It wasn't about exposing every lie. It wasn't about making them finally see me. It was about choosing me, after decades of being written out of my own story. If you've made it this far, I want to speak to you not as a character in a story, but as someone who lived through every quiet wound and every silent betrayal I shared with you. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just a legal victory. It was the moment I finally chose myself after years of choosing everyone else. And if anything in my story struck a nerve, if you've ever carried a burden that wasn't yours or stayed silent while someone else rewrote your truth, then I hope you'll stand with me here. Leave a comment, tell me what part of my journey hit closest to home, tell me what you would have done, or simply tell me that I wasn't wrong for walking away. Your voice matters more than you know. And please, take this with you. You are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to reclaim your narrative. You are allowed to stop fixing what other people keep breaking. Support yourself the way you've supported others, and don't apologize for choosing peace over chaos. If my story helped you feel seen, subscribe and stay with me. There's more to heal, more to rebuild, and you don't have to do it alone.